We are Rogue Media Sports.
Have you ever brought your magic to Walt Disney World like, hey, we came to play? Did you tip your tiara to a Creole princess or get goofy officially? When we come through, it's true magic, because we came to play at Walt Disney World Resort.
Hey, it's Mark Goodman.
And I'm Alan Light.
On today's podcast, Record Store Day founder Carrie Colleton is joining us to discuss the April 20th RSD special releases.
Plus, we'll talk live with our audience, the Sound Up Pod Squad, and find out who still listens to vinyl. And some updates from the Beatles universe.
Oh, good. Sound Up with Mark Goodman and Alan Light, the only music podcast that matters. Get it on Pandora, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
It is the Doomsday Podcast in the aftermath of a Cowboys' shocking 28-16 loss at Arizona team that was 0-2. Cowboys favored by 11 in this one. Some places it was up to 12. And an embarrassing loss. Lots to discuss. Tonight's show. I think people out there on Twitter already talking about, oh my gosh. By the way, Ed, I've talked to Stretch. Whoa. You talk about some harsh grades that will be arriving. But Ed Werder is on the scene as always. And Ed, first of all, because there's a lot of things we need to break down, let's give it some historical perspective, because it seems like they always make some form of history. In this case, it was very negative history.
Yeah, you mentioned that they closed as an 11-point favorite against the Cardinals, and so this now ranks as the largest upset loss for the Cowboys since 2006, and the third largest over the last 25 years. Their largest upset losses in the last 25 years. They were favored by 13.5 against the Lions in 2006 and lost, by 12.5 against the Rams in 2005 and lost, and today by 11 points against the Cardinals. And as they so often do against Arizona, wherever the game's played, they lost. And it was the first win for Arizona head coach Jonathan Gannon, the first win as a starting quarterback for Joshua Dobbs, who has been in the league for 7 years and made his first ever NFL start last December against the Cowboys in Nashville. Took the ball to the podium today saying this was a sort of full circle moment for him in his career to have started last year against the Cowboys for the first time in his career and then finally get his first win against the very same franchise in a situation where that was highly unlikely to happen, and probably is the kind of loss that will hurt this team later in the year when postseason seeding takes place and opponents are determined based on records, which weekends you play, where you play, because they've got some tough games coming up later this year. And the schedule is going to get a lot harder real soon when they play the 49ers in 2 weeks. But we know they have to play the Eagles twice, the Chargers, the Dolphins, who scored 70 points against Sean Payton's team today. So this is going to be a loss, I think, that harms them for the playoffs late in the year.
All right, and you just made me have some memories. You're right; it could totally harm them. I mean, because the Eagles are likely not going to stumble like this against teams they're supposed to beat by double digits. But that 2006 game, boy, Parcells was very, very upset, and a young Tony Romo, and part of the reason he was upset, either Jessica or Carrie Underwood, I can't remember which one, was like down on the field before the game, and they were a little concerned of where Tony's head was as they prepared to play that game or in the aftermath of that game. And the Cowboys did lose, you're right, against Detroit, and you've had them as, 13.5-point favorites. All right, it is, we've got a lot to discuss. Frito, please play the music. All right, Doomsday Podcast, and it's a bad night for the Cowboys. It ends a bad week. And Ed, we probably thought we would be talking about, the Cowboys were able to, they lose Trayvon Diggs, a huge setback. They have 3 starting linemen out that they had to they had to overcome this adversity, but they still were heavily favored, and they got it done. Well, they didn't get it done, and it didn't even feel that, fluky, because in a sense they were just playing catch-up the entire game, and, Arizona came out and just annihilated them with a run game, over 180 yards in the first half. But Ed, let's start with that, though. Just the fact, how much do we think, because we got red zone, we got a lot of areas to discuss and break down, but without Trayvon, losing these 3 linemen, as I was preparing tonight, I got to hear Mike McCarthy right after the game, and he was alluding to all the different things the Cowboys were dealing with this week. Do you, in this loss, do you give that any credence? Maybe you throw this out given all they were having to overcome.
Well, I think you recognize that there's going to be adversity and there's going to be injuries in the course of an NFL season, almost without fail. Very few teams make it through an entire season without a significant injury or multiple significant injuries. And I did go out to the Star this week and talk to Dak about, this being his 100th career start. And he was the first quarterback to do that since Tony Romo, to make 100 starts for the Cowboys. And he was talking about the fact that when you do have adversity, because I think there was some question about some of the offensive linemen because they hadn't practiced as to whether they're going to be ready to play the game or not. And Dak basically, he cited the next man up thing and basically said, hey, when you have adversity, you got to have the next guy be as good as the guy he's replacing. That's our expectation. That's our standard as an organization. That's our brotherhood, our belief in each other. And then no sooner did he say that, then we found out Trayvon Diggs was injured in practice with what turned out to be a torn ACL, and he would be missing the entire season. Look, you never want to lose Trayvon Diggs for the season, as the Cowboys did this week, and you never want to have to play Dak Prescott behind 3 backup offensive linemen, 2 of whom are making their first NFL starts. But if that's required, the winless Cardinals are the team you want to play. Like I said, their head coach had not won a game. The starting quarterback had not won a game. It's an organization that's been accused of tanking for the number 1 pick rather than trying to contend for the playoffs. So, like you alluded to, the first 2 games they played against the Giants and the Jets, they never trailed. In this game, they never led. And it was just, I don't know. It's hard to blame any one person. I think we all know that Mike McCarthy and Dak Prescott are going to get the majority of the blame, as they so often do, given the positions they occupy. But I think there were a lot of different things. Dobbs, like I said, played against the Cowboys, so he had some familiarity. Jonathan Gannon, former Eagles defensive coordinator, he knows Mike's offense. He knows Dallas's personnel. So he was probably feeling pretty good about the plan that they put together. So, but I think we need to talk about some of the issues that, have been revealed in this very lopsided game. The penalties became an issue again, which we've dealt with several times in the 4 years of Mike McCarthy's been the head coach. The red zone really hasn't been an issue at all the last 2 years. They've been the best team in football in the red zone. Now, is that Kellen Moore calling the plays? Is that because you have one of the best short yardage runners in football and Ezekiel Elliott? Both of those people are gone now. Yeah, it could be all of those things. But let's take a real hard look at those 2 circumstances, as we finish out the show here.
Yeah, and some of the games so far, the 2 wins were so lopsided that there were some red zone issues, but we kind of laughed them off because those teams weren't really in the game at all in those first 2 wins for the Cowboys. And even Mike McCarthy even joked about it, and it was a big problem today as the Cowboys were kicking field goals They got to seem to have a good field goal kicker. They'd like to stop sending him out there, and they didn't send him out one time, Ed. And, I think there was some question where the Cowboys, whether they should have taken those points. It was really interesting. You were just talking about the former Eagles coach, who's now the Arizona coach, didn't decline a penalty, which would have had the Cowboys in a 4th and 4 situation or 4th and goal situation. He pushed the Cowboys back. Well, Cowboys end up going for it and not getting the game there to 21-16. And I think there was some real. I think McCarthy left himself open to some real second guessing on even that decision. I mean, I know it seems funny that we're saying too many field goals, but like in that instance, I don't know what you were thinking, Ed, but I was kind of thinking, well, that kind of seems like the point in the game, kind of midway through the third quarter, getting the game to 21-16 might seem to be a positive thing there.
Yeah, and obviously we've discussed ad nauseum at times his questionable game management strategy, and certainly deserves to be questioned and second guessed there. For the very reason we're talking about, you're down 3 starting offensive linemen. Are you sure you want to try and score a short yardage red zone touchdown in this situation rather than just cut the lead by 3 points? Now he did have them backed up on their own 1 yard line, and they're very close to getting a safety because Micah Parsons was held on the next series on a pass rush, but the holding was initiated apparently outside the goal line or outside the end zone, and so they didn't call it, even though it continued inside the end zone. But the Cowboys did wind up getting a stop. They didn't make them punt from there, but they did ultimately get a stop and force a punt. And they did then go down and kick the field goal the next time. But so that in and of itself would suggest he didn't make the right decision, because when there was less time on the clock and the score was the same, he took the field goal the next time. But yeah, I mean, he did joke about the red zone last week, saying something about it was his own fault. You got to look at your play caller. He had a horse-esque game. Well, today after the game, he said, "We're not executing the way we'd like to. I have to do a better job. Starts with me. We need to do a better job in the red zone." And CeeDee Lamb said, "Hey, we got to score touchdowns. We're not going to go anywhere getting 3 points." Well, let's take a look at this. Atrocious red zone performance, which included, and basically the game ended with Dak Prescott throwing his first interception of the season in that very situation. But week 1, 3 red zone touchdowns on 4 red zone opportunities. Week 2 against the Jets, 2 red zone touchdowns on 6 red zone opportunities. And today, 1 red zone touchdown on 5 red zone opportunities. So they've gone 3 for their last 11. And over the course of the season, they are 6 for 15. That is not at all good. And they've gotten progressively worse each week. And just so you know, I think Bob Sturm posted this today, that they were 81 out of 121 in the red zone getting touchdowns over the past 34 games the last 2 years, with Kellen Moore calling the plays and Ezekiel Elliott being the short yardage goal line running back. They just don't seem to have that power back anymore. Dak today in the red zone, 2 for 9 for 25 yards with a touchdown and an interception. The touchdown obviously was on a screen pass, which was his first touchdown on a screen pass in 40 games. They had a turnover, as you mentioned, on downs when they tried to go for it, did get it, and the interception. So that is an area that has to be of great concern and has to get resolved pretty quickly. And you can say all you want about how bad the New England Patriots are. They're coming in here next week. But your next 2 opponents are the New England Patriots and the San Francisco 49ers. And both of those teams play pretty good defense most of the time. Yeah,
and the Patriots did get a win today over the Jets, and so they've got a little momentum going there. Ed, just to break it down, on some of the different, especially on the key one there when they still had a chance, they still had all their timeouts. I think a lot of our folks, we do see you out there on Twitter, and we like interacting with you and seeing what you're saying. Some people, Ed, had a problem with sort of the lack of sense of urgency as the Cowboys got, even though they had the timeouts, it's like 5 minutes left, and then all of a sudden it's like 3.5 or 4 minutes left, and they're just not exactly like jumping up to the line of scrimmage to try to get it in there. And then on the second down play, Ed, down there, they try an option play, and it was just like Arizona to CeeDee Lamb. I believe that was CD out there, and they've got like 4 defenders. Like they didn't have numbers. I mean, I don't, it's kind of like obviously McCarthy's the one calling the plays. It seemed like an odd choice down there that the play had 0 shot, and then they go on a fade route to CD, and usually you would think pretty good matchup there.
He had him open.
Yeah,
ball was underthrown.
Yeah, and wanted the interference. And in fact, on one of those, I'm trying to think. I don't want to mix up all my red zone stuff because one play he has where they thought they should have called interference, and maybe they should have. They did call it. They had the flag and they picked it back up. That was Gallup, and Ed, that was like that. He was open. I mean, he had won his route. That, to me, part of the problem, and again, I don't know why they picked that up because I think it easily could have been called interference, but it was a poor pass. I mean, sometimes you want to throw it up there and it almost causes the interference. I get that. But in that case, he was running wide open.
A good ball's a touchdown.
Yeah. And he underthrew him. And then they end up picking the flag up. So, and then the other one I'm talking about, which is a little earlier, I guess, is the one to CD, like a fade route. And CD kind of, I think he tried to. Some of these receivers will do this sometimes. They're more into trying to draw the pass interference than they are making the catch. And so, but again, it was not a good ball. And I would say overall, you got some play call issues in the red zone. You got some quarterback issues, and on the big interception, in watching it again, Ed, it just seemed like Dak saw here. The one shot on the TV copy that you could kind of look from what Dak was seeing, right? It looks like Cooks in his mind was kind of wide open, but and it almost to me was so wide open that maybe Dak threw a bit of a casual ball in there, and Kaiser White, who played really nice game, just jumped up and had a really easy interception, and that ended things.
I don't really see how Dak ever saw that was going to be an open throw and a completion. It had turnover written all over it. There were 3 defenders in the area. Cooks was never really open on the play. I don't understand where all of the pick plays that they've been running and the bunch stuff that they've been running, why those seem to disappear today and weren't part of the game plan, especially, packaged in the red zone to create some easy throws for a quarterback who, I'm not going to give him an excuse here, but he did not look comfortable behind that offensive line, right? He's without Zach Martin, perennial Pro Bowler. He's without Tyron Smith, his left tackle. He's without Tyler Biadasz, his center. So he's out there, and then Tyler Smith's playing for the first time this year. It's really amazing that since they drafted Tyler Smith, they have not had the 5 players they think are their best offensive line in any one game. Pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
And I would say, I thought of this before the game when they were talking about, all those guys being out up front. And TJ Bass and is it Trevor Hoffman?
No, that's
Brock Hoffman. Brock Hoffman making their first career starts.
Mm-hmm.
My thought was, if this was a preseason game, you wouldn't play Dak. You wouldn't play Dak behind this offensive line in a preseason game because the risk of injury would be way too high. But now you're out there in the regular season game, and it's for real, and it counts, and they're coming after you. And I thought they created a lot of pressure, maybe some imaginary pressure, but I don't think Dak ever looked that comfortable in the pocket. And he was not very accurate as a result, including the balls down the field that you're talking about, the CeeDee Lamb and Gallup that should have been easy touchdowns.
Yeah.
But it's kind of remarkable that the Cowboys have had 66 different offensive line combinations since McCarthy became the head coach, mostly because of injury. That's the 10th most in the NFL. in that span. And they had 8 offensive linemen active today, including Tyron Smith was in uniform, but obviously didn't play. So I think a lot of it, their failure in the red zone, a lot of it was that. I think Dak was not comfortable behind this offensive line, understandably so. But you know what? You're a $40 million quarterback. You got to make it work.
Yeah.
And you got to take advantage of the opportunities you do have, and he didn't do that.
No, he didn't. I will say on a rare positive note on this Doomsday, and by the way, you said that horse ass thing about what Mike said from last week. I just happened to hear the voice of the Cowboys, Brad Sham, as I was making my way to the studio tonight, and he said that he called it horse excrement, and he said excrement. In all 3 phases. And he also went on to say the Cowboys were badly outcoached. I mean, he's not exactly, he's a Cowboys guy. It was pretty interesting to hear a member of the Cowboys family basically saying they were not ready to play. They were badly outcoached. You don't always hear the play-by-play voice for an organization do that. I guess he's been around long enough to feel more comfortable than a lot of the play-by-play folks. But that was what he was said, and it's hard to argue with much of that. On a positive note, the guy you just mentioned, Gallup, looked really good. He'd had like one catch, I think, through 2 games, had not really had much of an impact at all, and yet on those slants, run after catch along the sideline, looked fast, looked good, looked really good for the Cowboys, so maybe that's something to at least take a peek at moving forward if they kind of got Gallup moved in. And by the way, Ed, one thing we need to talk about, and we'll do this, by the way, we'll let Stretch have his say, and then I want us to talk about the Cowboys' run defense or lack thereof. We've seen it crop up before. This was another embarrassing day on that front, and that was historical in terms of, for a half, how much they ended up giving up, Ed, 222 rushing yards. 183 of it was in the first half. Now, they got a loss. It may have come back to 180, but at one point, it was 183 yards in the first half. We need to kind of talk about that. Ed, I did want to say, and we're going to be, one of the things we do is we do some video on YouTube, and we like you to see Ed when he's in studio, and his hair looks good and everything. We're also going to be showing folks some of the houses from our custom home, partner. It is Marable Homes, and Blake Marable, tremendous job. They're doing more and more homes at Cedar Creek Lake. They're open to, what's that thing called out there? Chambers. They have that Chambers Lake that people kind of like, and then Hideaway. Like, if there's a lot of beautiful lakes kind of within 100 miles of the Metroplex, and he's kind of started to gain a reputation for beautiful lake houses as well, if that's something you're interested in. And, we got so many great listeners. We got people that have second homes like Ed, and we've got people that don't like me, and so it's kind of all over the map. But these homes are just gorgeous. And again, if you're in anywhere really in Dallas, some of these are going up in Lake Highlands, Highland Park, other places. But luxury homes, beautiful homes, and it is Marable Homes. And Ed, I know he's got Cowboys connections through the Murkison family, but I know you've been excited to have the Marable family back with us.
Always glad to have a returning presenting sponsor, as Blake and his wife are, and they do create a gorgeous product, and it is worth you tuning in and taking a look at some of these homes, in addition to going to their website. And getting maybe even a greater sense. But I cannot wait for us to bake the cookies and lead people through some of these homes. I'll park the cars. You'll give them a home tour. It'll be a nice day.
We're going to start doing open houses on some of these homes. Problem is they sell these things quickly, and, of course, these people that they don't have a lot of open houses for these custom homes. People jump in those things. But, Ed, I think they would love for us to stop by and maybe welcome people into their new home with cookies and that kind of thing. It is Blake and Amy Marable. Thank you so much for your sponsorship. It is now time to visit with a man who, he is fiery, and I think he will represent the feelings and the emotions of a lot of Cowboys listeners and fans out there. Even people that don't like the Cowboys listen to us. It is time for Stretch Plays with former Cowboys scout and coach Glenn Stretch Smith. It is Stretch Plays. Here he is. Glenn Stretch Smith. You can watch him Sunday evenings, WFAA, and then at noon on the following day, Mondays, WFAA, the ABC affiliate right here in Dallas-Fort Worth area. And Stretch, let's get right into it. The some interesting, red zone issues. Cowboys have not been good this season. Now, as far as scoring touchdowns in the red zone, 6 of 15 now for the season. Start us right there, and we can kind of put a grade on some of this, some of the red zone calls, some of the things you saw, but just overall, what did you see in that red zone as the Cowboys continue to have huge issues there? 1 touchdown and several field goals is how they ended this one.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like right now you got Riddick, you got Kellen Moore, and it was the head coach taking over the play calling, and okay, well, we're going to run the Texas coast, and we're going to do some of that, and I think some of that's fine. And again, it's very difficult when you come out of when you're in coaching. I understand play calling. It's easy to to be critical of the armchair quarterback after the fact. But I can tell you this, that when you overall look at what the Cowboys were trying to do, whether it was trying to get a mismatch on the outside, whether they were trying to get the ball on the perimeter, whether they were trying to hammer the ball inside, right now, this offense in the red zone is really bad. And it's bad because, again, I'm going to go to the drive after he decides to go for it on 4th down, which I felt like was the most reckless thing I've seen. It almost reminds me of a guy taking his credit card at about a 28% clip and saying, all right, I'm going to gamble with this credit card and I'm going to go see if I can get something done here. That's how reckless it feels. And I'm going to the one drive that I think really changed the football game for me was he goes for it on 4th down, and he felt like he needed to kind of change there in the second half. He had it down there, and I was shocked that Arizona took the holding call, so he backed them up, and they had it 3rd and I think it was 3rd and 15 on the 14-yard, 3rd and 14 on the 15-yard line. They throw an option stick route into Ferguson. He turns it into a 10-yard gain. I couldn't believe that, number one, that they took the holding penalty. That gave the Cowboys an extra down. Then they got it 4th and 4. And, okay, he feels like he's got a call to score. He sends the tight end, again, on another inside stick. They're not able to hit it. They don't convert on 4th down. They go 3 and out, get the football right back, and they get right back in the red zone. And on 2nd down, he calls speed option. The only reason you would call a speed option play is because you would have numbers to one side or another. And I know this is a lot of football jargon, but the bottom line is you've got to have at least one guy as your pitch key out there, and then you're pitching it off of that. We're blocking the other guys on the perimeter. He comes up and calls speed option. They pitch the ball. Well, shit, there's 4 guys out there. I mean, terrible call. Just a terrible call. And then it's 3rd down from the 9-yard line, and he calls a fade to CeeDee Lamb, who about halfway walks off the football, and then they throw the fade up. Now, I mean, this is a guy who calls himself an analytical, takes all the analytics into consideration. That's a 9% ball. 9% is what that is right now. I mean, and you can't come up with a better call than to throw something that's a 9% ball is maddening to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it reflects of the struggles that they're having in the red zone. I get it. You got 4 pretty much backup offensive linemen in there who, oh, by the way, I thought did a pretty decent job today. I think they rushed the football for almost 200 yards. I mean, they were able to protect pretty well. And I thought the offensive line did I felt like a really nice job along with a running back. And the only 2 positions that got winning grades. Everybody else, to me, it just kind of felt like they were walking through the motions. Now, I'm going to say this. It's a hard place to go play. I mean, even when we won the Super Bowl in 95, it's a tough place to go play in the desert. It really is. And I get all that. But when you go to the play calling, and again, I'm not going to be afraid to say, F is what I'm giving them right now. And they better get it cranked up in a real hurry, because guess what? I think New England is obviously going to be very sound defensively with what they do, and then you got San Francisco. So we go from a 2-0 start, and last week I think it became evident they kicked 5 field goals last week. You got to get this buttoned up, and you're going to have to come up with some better schematic things than what you did against arguably the worst football team right now in the NFL.
Well, they had played a couple of close games, 0-2, and then they come out, jump on the Cowboys. The Cowboys could never quite get over the hump. F pretty much all across the board. You're right. 3 linemen were out. 3 backups were in there. And, kind of a decent effort from those guys. And, of course, Mike McCarthy said afterwards he was proud of them. Stretch, I would say that McCarthy said after the game that those safeties were playing real high, and I think trying to say that they were keeping everything in front of them, so some of the things they wanted to do down the field, he insinuated, were taken away from them. But then again, that doesn't have anything to do with, like, in the red zone down there with coming up with something a little bit more creative, because even with the game on the line, you've got to have that play. Nobody had separation, and he throws the ball in there. It gets picked off, and a terrible ending right there. Now, Stretch, as you get ready to go in that TV studio and record, I am sort of curious. What you said the defense on the defensive side of the ball that they cleaned up a couple things. They did give up right around 180 yards rushing in the first half. Now, we can always say, well, a lot of it were on 3 or 4. Well, it doesn't matter, because that's the huge plays that they stacked it up on. What did you see? First, obviously the Dobbs keeper, everybody crashed down, and he just had a huge open field. Safety makes a bad angle. But what did you see that allowed the Cardinals to come out and have such huge success against the Cowboys running the football?
Well, let me finish by saying this. I'm going to go back. I mean, no kidding, Mike. They were playing high safeties. Run the football when they have high safeties. It's not real hard. Now, we'll go to the defense, and I thought the defense adjusted the half. Yes, took some poor angles. There was no surprise to me that this team was going to run zone option. This is a staff that pretty much a lot of guys came from Philadelphia. They same thing they did at Philadelphia. They run that zone option look. I mean, Dobbs is not a great thrower of the football. He likes to keep it and run. Connors hit it up in there. I thought they adjusted well at the half. I thought they went in and said, okay, look, here's what we need to do. Let's clean this up a little bit. And they took good angles to take some of that stuff away in the second half. Now, Malik Hooker busts on the deep over on the play action. You got to get that cleaned up. You can't have those PIs. I mean, Land had a PI. Lewis had a defensive holding that was able to get them to convert on a big third down situation. But I thought overall, the defense was able to make some adjustments at the half. The problem is like you said, I mean, they got behind, and then when you get behind, and really you need to be running the football against that team. I don't care if you got three or three of the five offensive linemen or second string guys. You should run off the football and be able to road grade them, and that's what they did. They just couldn't stick with it. So defensively, I thought a very average overall effort. I thought do they play hard? Yes, they do. But when I say effort, I'm saying combined effort with coaching, being able to communicate it with your team and being able to adjust at the half. They did do that, but not well enough to keep your team in the game. And when you know that you've got three of your five offensive linemen down, I think that's the group that had to be challenged. That's the group that had to come out and continue to play at a very high level. They didn't do that in the first half, and because of that, I mean, I'm giving them a D, and I'm only giving them a D because they adjusted at the half. The thing that still concerns me is your run fits have got to be a lot cleaner. You have to be able to fill and fit certain gaps, and if you don't think that, obviously Belichick will understand that. If you don't think Philadelphia's understand that, and you don't think that San Francisco's going to understand that, you're going to have to get that cleaned up. It bothered me that Hooker let the deep over go right in front of him because that was a situation where Dallas needed to get the football back. Arizona made a big play, critical play in a critical time in the game. Now, I'm going to challenge you, Matt, and Ed, the guys that, the concerning thing for me is, and I look at this game, and I think back about when I was with the Cowboys, and this may be unfair in a lot of ways, but I'm telling you, we had guys from a leadership standpoint who were able to step up when we got in these tough situations where you're on the road, you get in a dogfight, and you got to have somebody's got to step up and make some plays for you. And I didn't see that, and that's the concerning thing for me when I look at this. Number one, they got to clean these issues up in the red zone. Number two, they got to get better run fits. And number three, they got to challenge this football team, that the leaders of this football team, whoever those guys are, because right now I'm not sure I can tell you who they are. They're going to have to step up and make some critical plays at critical times of the football game. And you didn't see that in this game, and that's the reason why I think, you felt like that the Cowboys just go out in the desert and lay an egg versus a team that's, at best, average in multiple positions and not very good in others. And so that's a concerning thing for me is you're going to have to get this stuff cleaned up. And I think, hopefully it galvanizes this football team. They come back, they play New England, and get this thing going. And then, going to San Francisco, we know it's a long year, and I'm not going to overreact to 2 wins in a row where they won by a combined score of 70-10, nor am I going to overreact to going out to the desert and laying an egg. But it is concerning, and I think if you don't realize that and you don't look at the overall scheme of what's going on with the football team and their red zone issues, you're blind to some things.
Stretch, gentleman Frank tweeted in tonight, not going to lie, I'm ready to hear the evisceration of Cowboys on all 3 phases. Hope Stretch won't get too hoarse from all the yelling he might do. All right, now, Stretch, you kept it fairly even keel, but you handed out an F and you handed out a D. And now you will prepare to go on the air tonight in probably a very nice-looking sport coat and present us with some plays and break some things down. You can watch that 10:30 on Sports Special with Joe Trahan. Joe Trahan coming to you live from the scene of the crime in the desert. And it is interesting to hear you say Arizona can be tough, although there's a lot of Cowboys fans that usually show up at those games. So, to me, it shouldn't have been that crazy of an environment, but Cowboys did not get it done against a team that was average. Stretch as a what?
Bowl of grits. You know that saying, Mosley. Average is a damn bowl of grits. And I'm gonna say this: almost under average. That was disappointing. And again, I know how tough it is to go out there, and it is. And I mean, you make a good point. Yes, there's a lot of Cowboy fans out there, but I mean, it's just a hard place to go to, and it always has been. I mean, even when they were bad football teams, I can remember going out there and absolutely getting in a dogfight with them, and that's right where the Cowboys were today. Again, it just concerns me that the guys that are supposed to be leaders on this football team didn't step up and make any plays. And I think if you're honest with yourself, that's got to be alarming to you.
Yep, and Dobbs and his bunch, and Connor and everybody else, and Kazir White, they did make plays out there for the Cardinals. So much for tanking. I guess the Cowboys were not the right team to play if you want to tank to try to get Caleb Williams. Stretch, have a tremendous drive and safe evening, and we'll be watching you on TV. Thank you very much.
Mosley, have yourself a good night, buddy. See you later.
And there he goes. Stretch plays off into the night on the Doomsday Podcast. All right, Ed, Werder, and I, Ed, as we kind of try to move forward from this, but let's continue to look at the game right off the bat. And I kind of thought early on that the Dobbs run was going to be some kind of aberration, right? It was a RPO type situation. Cowboys bit like crazy. Everybody bit on it. And he goes out the backside for like 60-something yards, okay? Bad play by the Cowboys, but maybe it was just going to be one thing, kind of like what you saw against the Jets. They had one poor play that went for a huge score, and that was really the only thing the Jets did. Ed, the problem was the Cardinals just kept doing things like that throughout the day, and even when the Cowboys kind of climbed back in the game and were within striking distance in the fourth quarter, what did the Cardinals do? But they found a huge play that helped kind of put the Cowboys in bad shape. But first of all, Ed, let's just deal with the run defense. It's been bad at times in the past. It was awful today, and it simply was a case whether it was Connor. I mean, they lined the wide receiver up. The young man that played at Purdue, Rondell Moore. Yeah. And he was incredible and busted. And it was just like, again, Ed, sometimes you're here, bad run fits, this, that. It was just all across the board, poor angles, poor defensive line play, and the Cowboys
gap integrity.
They just got gashed in a big way.
Yeah, I mean, I remember last week they stopped what they thought were the best running back tandem in football in Breece Hall and Dalvin Cook. Held them to 15 or 16 yards between the two of them, and it was all that talk from Cowboys defensive players in the locker room about how they really committed to each other this offseason to getting the runs stopped and then turning it into a pass rushing game, which is what they excel at. Micah Parsons' quote, hey, run at me. Uh-huh. And then they go out in the next week and against, a Cardinals team that has limited talent, they allowed 3 rushing plays of 25-plus yards in the first half. They didn't allow one of those in their first 2 games. The Cardinals, as you mentioned, had 180 yards rushing in the first half. That's more than any team in the league had given up in a half this year, and more than the Cowboys had given up in their first 2 games combined. Over 8 quarters. They gave up more in 2 quarters to the Cardinals than they did in 8 quarters to the Giants and the Jets. And I think that will bother Dan Quinn quite a bit. But, I mean, the defense really – it was a day where we talked about it. Yeah, they lost one of their best players. But the offensive line – the offense needed some help because they were down 3 linemen. They weren't going to make a lot of explosive plays in all likelihood. The Cardinals were better on defense than they are on offense. And, Dan Quinn's defense created 0 turnovers. They led the NFL going into this game with 7 takeaways. They had none in this game. I don't even think they came close to one. And Micah Parsons had the only sack. He's got a sack in every game. But 1 sack. That's it. I mean, there were no plays on defense that created an opportunity for the offense to have a short field, or we've seen this defense score on its own. But none of that happened today. And the Cowboys, given their offensive shortcomings and personnel on that side of the ball, really needed some help in that regard, and they didn't get it.
Yeah, and Ed, just so nobody tweets at you, DeMarcus Lawrence was credited with a sack as well as Mike.
Oh, was he?
They did have 2 sacks, but your point holds up. That there was not a consistent. And again, think about who they faced this season. Daniel Jones was just like, I mean, that game was over in a hurry because of the way it started with the block kick. Backup quarterback in Zach Wilson, backup quarterback in Dobbs, and yet I guess you could argue they were in this game, but again, they were chasing the Cardinals all day. And then, Ed, to your point, I mean, I was just looking at some of the numbers rushing for the Cardinals. Connor ends up with 98 rushing yards. Dobbs 55, and Rondell Moore, who we were just talking about, 3 carries, 54 yards. So they had three different folks, including their quarterback, with 54 yards or more, and I think, boy, it kind of turns into a pride thing, and I don't know if. I'm not sure McCarthy's doing his team any favors by saying, well, we had a really rough week for us. Nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear it. Did Vegas, first of all, they didn't find out till pretty late, obviously, Saturday, that they weren't going to have those linemen. But they didn't adjust the thing. They knew they were going to have Diggs, and they left the line at right around 11, which is an enormous line for a visiting team in the NFL. And then the Cowboys lose 28-16. So, Ed, unless we find out something more, something that we're not hearing about yet happened with the team, all we have to go on is Trayvon Diggs, which, again, very significant, and then 3 starting linemen. Very significant. But I mean, Cowboys still have to go take care of business. And I thought you made a good point earlier, too, about maybe Dak didn't feel comfortable behind that line. But still, how many times do we have this conversation, Ed? I mean, you and I are certainly not Dak bashers by any stretch of the imagination. But you come into these games and go, well, they should have this huge quarterback, advantage, right? And it doesn't matter. Didn't matter. They lost 28-16. They got Dobbs on the other end. Last year it was Brock Purdy, and Dak was horrible in that playoff game. So it's again, so much football to be played. We may look back and go, this was kind of a fluky deal, but extremely concerning.
I think the reason people are bothered by it is because this team has a recent history of playing down to the level of its competition, right? These are always the opponents that they look the worst against. Now, the Giants, we don't think they made the playoffs last year. The Jets are horrible. They haven't been in the playoffs in 12 years, so they rolled the Jets and they rolled the Giants. So maybe they don't always play down to the level of competition, but this is one of those situations where it seems they did. And yes, there were some extenuating circumstances, but I think really good teams are able to overcome that. And who knows how long this is. The Diggs thing is going to be a year-long issue, and I'm a little concerned that I don't think Stephon Gilmore has looked like a dominant corner. And he got beat for one of the touchdowns today, and he looked out of position on several other completions down the boundary. So I think that's going to be a loss that hurts them maybe more than we first thought. I mean, people say, hey, well, they got Deron Bland, and he led the team in interceptions last year. And they got Gilmore, who's a former defensive player of the year in the NFL. And those things are true, and they do have some depth at those positions. That being said, they're paying Diggs $100 million because he has 18 interceptions in 3 years. That just doesn't happen. You don't get that from most players. And so that's a significant loss. And the losing the lineman, I think we all knew that the place where they were most at risk because they had the least amount of depth was on the offensive line. And they've been playing without all of their offensive linemen, like I said, for the past year and a half now. And who knows how many games you're going to get out of Tyron Smith, looking at his recent history. So is this going to be a long-term issue on both sides of the ball? I don't think so. McCarthy indicated it's not. But here and there, they may have to face the situation again. Yeah,
very very concerning. And then since we were talking about all three phases and how bad they looked, again, part of these penalties, there was an offsides where they gave them a first down. Now, they ended up still kicking the field goal, but that's a bad play on special teams. They had it ended up, and again, they ended up having a long drive, but it would have been a much easier drive, and they wouldn't have had to. They would have started it in Arizona territory, right, on a 60-something yard return. What is that? A 61-yard return by. It ended up being the penalty ended up being like 61 yards of penalty. With the lost, it was like a 51. Yeah, 51-yard return that was negated.
And let's talk about the penalties. This is kind of the last big point of emphasis for me coming out of the game was they had 16 total penalties. 13 of those were accepted. That's their second most penalties in a game under McCarthy, including the playoffs. This is the third time the Cowboys have had 15 or more penalties in a game. That's the most in the NFL during that time. And if you look at the result, 2021, Week 12, 18 penalties, lost to the Raiders. Sunday, 16, lost to the Cardinals. 2021 wild card game, lost to the 49ers. All games with 15 or more penalties, again, most in the NFL during the past 4 years.
All right, and Mike said after the game that they had talked to the players about specifically this crew, and there might be some frustration and all that, but none of it seemed to help. He also made the point, Ed, that they played higher with their safeties, basically meaning doing everything they could to keep everything in front of them, and that's what, when coaches lose, that's one of the things they like. Boy, that's an old Garrett thing, right? Well, we couldn't throw the ball down the field because they took that all the way away from us. Well, what happens, Ed, when you back your safeties way up? You generally should have a lot in the middle of the field available to you. Now, again, maybe they'll say, well, we just couldn't block it up. We needed to give the linemen help, and so we weren't able to get into what we needed. And the truth of the matter is, when you have that many pre-snap type penalties, it does put you in bad situations. And Dak was getting sacked early, and a bad day altogether. Cowboys, again, Ed, will be the America's Game of the Week. I don't think they technically were the America's Game of the Week, by the way. This was a rare 325 game where I think it was another one. Was it the Chiefs?
Kansas City was the national game.
Yeah.
Maybe because Taylor Swift was going to be watching the game with her new beau, Travis Kelce, the Chiefs tight end, at Arrowhead, and they rolled the Bears. And our good friend Matt Eberflus, former Cowboys defensive coach, has now lost 13 consecutive games with the Bears, the longest losing streak in franchise history. And that franchise has been playing football as long as any franchise in the NFL. So that's not a good distinction. And next week, it'll be interesting to see Ezekiel Elliott back here. He's coming off an 80-yard game today for the Patriots, his first year since in a uniform other than the Cowboys star. We know how close he was with many of his former Cowboys teammates, especially the starting quarterback. So I think it'll be an interesting week to see how they speak of each other and how motivated each is on Sunday at Jerry World.
Yeah, I'm only a little bummed that they won't have the kettles out for him if he did score.
Maybe he'll bring his own.
To jump in the kettle. he could certainly do that. Ed, good work, man. You're traveling all over the place. You and I will both be in position next week to cover that Patriots Cowboys game. Ed, tough weekend for me. My high school, that my daughter's a part of, a kind of a shocking loss on homecoming. The Bears, my alma mater, my college alma mater, shocking. Well, Texas, it wasn't really a shocking loss. It was just a sad loss. And then the team we cover, the Cowboys. I mean, everywhere you look, Ed, loss. And the team you kind of grew up enjoying and covering, Colorado, went on the road. And by the way, I like that Oregon coach's pregame speech. He said something kind of like, they're trying to capture the most clicks. We're trying to capture the most wins. I kind of like that. I thought Dan Lanning came with a pretty good pregame speech. All right, Ed, I appreciate it. Strong work by you. Safe travels as you go out to cover all sorts of games this week. And for Ed Werder and Mark Frito Friedman and Frito Nation Productions, one of the great production companies in the Metroplex and in the state of Texas, we say goodnight from far north Dallas. Good night, everybody.
Hey, it's Mark Goodman.
And I'm Alan Light.
On today's podcast, Record Store Day founder Carrie Colleton is joining us to discuss the April 20th RSD special releases.
Plus, we'll talk live with our audience, the Sound Up Pod Squad, and find out who still listens to vinyl. And some updates from the Beatles universe.
Oh, good. Sound Up with Mark Goodman and Alan Light, the only music podcast that matters. Get it on Pandora, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.